So I've got 10 currently banned Yu-Gi-Oh cards that I believe could come off the forbidden list with little to no issue in the game today, and at least one of them is probably going to trigger you. And that's okay, because this is just meant to be a fun thought process, a discussion. I want to hear what other people think about this. Because Yu-Gi-Oh has changed a lot over the years, and there are a lot of cards that I think are on the ban list and kind of just have been sitting there for a long time, but might not really be much of an issue in the game today. Also, this is going to be a video that's more about like the generic cards. There are obviously a lot of archetypal cards that also need to come off the ban list in my opinion. I'm going to sort of lightning round them at the end of the video. But yeah, I wanted to focus on sort of the generic staple stuff because I feel like a lot more people can have opinions on those. And feel free to have those opinions. You know, let me know down in the comments. Feel free to kind of disagree, give me your reasoning, rationale, other cards that I might have missed. Just make sure that you stay respectful. And worst comes to worst, remember that if you disagree with me, I don't work at Konami, so I mean, I can't actually make these things happen. So like, you can chill, it's not like that big of a deal. All right, so let's get started with Mirage of Knightmare. This is an old continuous spell that says, during your opponent's standby phase, you draw until you have 4 cards in your hand. Then, during your next standby phase, you'll have to randomly discard cards equal to the number of cards that you drew at the past effect. So, obviously you can see why this card is a little bit extreme, right? You're getting to draw a lot of cards, you're getting to discard a lot of cards, and there's always kind of a fear around these sorts of cards, you know, in Yu-Gi-Oh, where like you're getting to just draw so much and send so much, there's all this cycling and stuff. But here's why I don't think that Mirage of Knightmare would really be much of a problem today. The obvious scenario that a lot of people would imagine is like, okay, you do a big long combo, you set up a cool board, then you slap down Mirage of Knightmare, and then your opponent's standby phase, you draw cards, and that's where you draw your, you know, effect veilers and your ash blossoms and your droll and your other hand traps, and it's a whole great thing, right? Like it's perfect, that's the ideal scenario. Maybe the secondary scenario might be that a deck like, you know, Dark World or Shadal's or something, I don't know, some deck that wants their things in the graveyard, you know, could benefit from this, and that'd be pretty cool too. But the reason why I don't think that this card is very good is because if you think about how modern Yu-Gi-Oh works, you kind of want every card in your hand to be usable immediately at the start of the duel, because so much relies on the first turn. In fact, that's going to be a bit of a trend with some of these cards that I'm going to mention in this list. But yeah, so Mirage of Knightmare isn't a starter card. It's not, you know, a normal summon that you can get something off of. It's not an extender card. It's not a card that stops hand traps like Called by the Grave or a Cross-Out Designator. It's not a hand trap in and of itself. It's just kind of an empty sort of nothing card until it finally gets its effect later on. And I think that that is as good a reason as any for it to just kind of not really be seen as worthwhile. Remember that this and pretty much every card I'm going to be talking about isn't searchable. So if we assume that this card goes from 0 to 1, think about it. What decks would really run this card? Like, I think the most likely scenario might be maybe a trap-based deck where, you know, they can slap down Mirage of Knightmare, summon, you know, just some barrier statue or something like that, right? Set, you know, 4 trap cards, and then in the, you know, in the next standby phase, they'll draw some cards, and like that could be a scenario where like it's okay, and I guess hopefully they'll draw hand traps, but then it's like, well, those sorts of decks probably aren't running hand traps because they're usually using something like Time-Tearing Morganite, which honestly, like almost feels like a weirdly better modern version of this card. But yeah, so I don't know. I kind of just, I don't think that would be like a really huge scenario, but you guys can let me know what you think about that one. The next one is a pretty easy one, Heavy Storm. This card is already at 1 in the OCG and also in Master Duel, so I'm really surprised that the TCG hasn't just, you know, brought it back yet either. I feel like it'll probably be happening pretty soon. The typical argument against this card is that, you know, you can destroy your own spells and traps and that can trigger some really powerful effects, right? Like maybe an Unchained deck would have a field day getting to use Heavy Storm and blowing up, you know, some of their set cards. Or perhaps there's like a pendulum strategy out there that wants its scales to be popped and they get some effects, and it's a whole fun thing. But that's like kind of it. I mean, like, I don't really know. Is there something like obvious that I'm missing here? This card's been around, like I said, in Master Duel and the OCG and just doesn't really see a whole bunch of play. Harpy's Feather Duster has been unbanned for years. Like, it's been a long time and it doesn't really cause a problem. So I don't think this is a matter of like being something that can stop the opponent. I just think it's like, maybe people are, they're just afraid of like some small amount of exploitation going on. But again, we're just assuming this card goes from 0 to 1. So like, at best, I just feel like it would be another good side deck card against a trap deck. And that's like kind of it. I mean, I guess you'd main deck it in Unchained. And like that would kind of just be, that'd be the story. That's Heavy Storm. It's actually very similar, in my opinion, to the next card on the list, which is Giant Trunade. Now this one is a hair spicier because I know that Giant Trunade kind of has this reputation of like, it can bounce and reuse certain, other continuous spell and trap cards, like equip cards, or certain things like that. So, Premature Burial comes to mind, Call of the Haunted comes to mind, maybe even like a weird card like Fiendish Chain that found itself on the field. The thing is, I don't think any of this is like all that big of a deal. Like, this is another card that again is not searchable. So like if you draw it, cool, you can do a cute little combo. But if you don't draw it, then there's so many things that kind of have to like fall into place, in my opinion, for Giant Trunade to really work out well. And as far as like being another way of getting rid of back row, you could make the argument that, yeah, trap decks are kind of suffering. Like, there's so many cards that can just destroy like all of your back row in one go. So maybe having another one isn't very chill, and I get that. But I'm just wondering like what deck is really gonna like sit here and exploit Giant Trunade? What deck's gonna search it somehow? And and when they exploit it, like let's say some Pendulum deck kind of bounces its scales and does a little thing, will it matter very much? Like, I'm just not really sure. So yeah, just sort of, I don't think, I'm not terribly impressed with this card. I feel like it's like maybe a little more dangerous than Heavy Storm, but not by much. All right, next one is where things really get spicy and where I think some of the dissenting comments are gonna begin. So, Card of Safe Return. This is a continuous spell that says anytime that you special summon a monster from the graveyard, you get to draw one card. And there is no limitation to this, so like you can potentially draw your whole deck out. I will be clear. This is probably one of the ones I was like the shakiest on and even including in this list because I get it, right? This is the sort of card where like once this goes down, you probably could just get like FTK'd or something. There could be like Exodia draw loops. You could think of a deck like Dark World that would just draw its whole deck out. And so in that way, I get it. I get that this is probably just better off staying banned. But similar to Mirage of Knightmare, I actually don't know if it would necessarily be like an auto-include in as many decks as you might think. So sure, plenty of decks special summon from the graveyard, but Card of Safe Return is not a starter card on its own. It's not actually an extender card on its own, and it does not stop hand traps. It is not a hand trap. It is not a self-sufficient card. It has to get on the field, stay on the field, and then other things have to happen in order for you to draw cards. So in that way, I kind of find myself wondering like, would this really be like seen as the worst possible outcome if your opponent has it, or like as the best possible thing that you could play and stuff? Again, I'm torn on this, so I want to hear more people's opinions about the card. I still feel like there's like a chance that it could just kind of come back and be fine. There's also a chance that it could be just extremely broken and OTK enabling and just need to get banned again, but I'm pretty open-minded. I think that I'd be interested in seeing that happen, and then they can ban it again and it'll be all right. Okay, the next card on the list and the final spell card is a bit of a meme, but I'm actually being serious when I say it, Pot of Greed. So this card, I know people joke about like, unban Pot. I actually don't know that Pot of Greed is a particularly broken card these days. It is certainly still a good card. Let's be clear about that. Getting to just get a free +1, just draw 2 cards just like that is great. It could eat an Ash Blossom. It could just sort of get you to, the starter and extender that you need to have. But I thought about it a little bit more, and it's kind of it sits in a bit of a weird spot for me. So I think that first of all, if you consider like the value of searching a specific card versus drawing like a random card or 2 cards, people tend to kind of err towards searching a specific card. That's actually why some people feel like Pot of Prosperity should be banned because it digs 6 cards deep and it can get you to the one thing that you need. And we know that in Yu-Gi-Oh, the power of like a single card cannot be overstated. There are cards that are like 1-card combos and just like build entire boards on their own. So what does that have to do with Pot of Greed? Well, to me, it kind of has to do with the fact that like, if I had the choice between digging 6 cards deep and like picking a card versus drawing 2 cards, I'd probably pick that. Now that doesn't mean that people wouldn't run Pot of Greed, they would just like run both, right? Like it wouldn't be a very difficult decision. But that's something to think about. And then another thing to think about is that it would probably just eat an Ash Blossom. Now that could kind of go either way because it's like, well, okay, your opponent might feel forced to Ash because if they let you draw 2, then the consequences would be significantly worse afterwards. And that's fair. I think people would probably just Ash like a Pot of Greed most of the time. Although there's an argument that maybe you would want to actually save your Ash for like when you know what your opponent's playing, and like that's kind of one of those dynamics that would change going into game 2 and game 3. And also speaking of game 2, I actually feel like people would probably just side deck out Pot of Greed. And that sounds wild to say, but if you consider, the typical scenario of your opponent going first, making a board of negates, like let's say, Alzamina Sylvia, Fiendsmith Desiree, a couple other cards, if we're talking Master Duel, you add on a Barone and some stuff like that. No shortage of Omni negates or just things to kind of disrupt you. Your Pot of Greed's not resolving. So the scenario I kind of came up with in my head is, in a situation like that, you'd really probably rather have something like Dark Ruler No More, right? If Dark Ruler No More is the card that you would have drawn with Pot of Greed, then you really would have rather actually had Dark Ruler No More to begin with, because the Pot of Greed wasn't going to resolve to get you there. It's a niche scenario, but it's just something that, like, I'm not really sure that Pot of Greed would be like so overpowered or so busted. Now, I guess the elephant in the room here is that if it's going to 1, then it's also just sort of a sacky card, because like one person sees it and it just feels like it could sort of like, steamroll into a victory. And I get that, but honestly, I feel like Pot of Greed is like more tame than Graceful Charity in this like thought process I had. So I'd like to see it come back to 1 and just see if that ends up being like an issue or a problem. Maybe it won't, and actually it probably won't, because Konami's already kind of going hard on the pot cards these days, particularly in like Master Duel. They've just been like banning and limiting them left and right, and even in the OCG a little bit. So like, maybe I'm just kind of like off my rocker here. So next we're going to talk about a few trap cards on the list, and I think that these will be fun because there's a few weird ones. All right, the first one is actually Return from a Different Dimension. So this is a trap where you pay half your life points and special summon as many of your banished monsters as possible, and also they like leave the field at the end of the turn. So this card sounds insane, right? Like it kind of gives very Soul Charge, Dimension Fusion vibes. Just summon all your banished cards, like that's crazy, like you're gonna get all this stuff back and combo, and it's insane. But it's also a trap card, which means that if you're going first, it's not actually going to really aid you in any of your combos. There are certain decks where a lot of stuff will end up banished. So like, in the course of a deck's like first turn combo. So then being able to set Return from a Different Dimension and like use it, spring it in the opponent's turn could potentially lead to more disruptions or more plays or more pluses. So like that's a scenario for sure. But again, this card's gonna be at 1, it's not gonna be searchable, and because it's a trap, it's not actually gonna be useful to you on your first turn. It's not going to get any of your combos started, it's not going to stop your opponent, and so much, kind of relies on that first turn going off without a hit. So you really want your cards to be starters and extenders and things like that. I know I've been saying this a lot, but it is something to really consider with a card like this. And then of course, if you're going second, you'll be very lucky if this sort of thing resolves. Like your opponent already went first, they set up, they have stuff going on, they've got negations, interruptions, pops, all that stuff, and you draw this? Oh goodness, right? Like, so this would definitely be a card that would just get sided out when you're going second, and it's like, I don't know. So yeah, that slow speed of a trap card is kind of where I feel like this sort of card could go to 1 and just not really be a problem. But I look forward to people's sort of disagreements about this. I will say that I thought about Dimension Fusion, which is sort of the spell card version of this, pay 2,000, summon, all your remove from play cards and stuff. That card seems a little bit more insane just because it's very proactive, it's a spell. But I thought that this seemed a little bit slower, and so like it seems like it could maybe just happen. Like it might just come back and people wouldn't care. Okay, well next trap card is Sixth Sense. So you declare 2 numbers from 1 to 6, then your opponent rolls a 6-sided die, and if the result is one of the numbers that you declared, then you draw that many cards. And if it's not, then you have to send that many cards from the top of your deck to the graveyard. So obviously, this is a very powerful trap. I remember this being really good in like 2013, 14, right before it got banned, kind of a dragon roller thing or something like that. You can see why this card seems obnoxious. I mean, you can draw like up to 6 cards with it, 5 or 6 cards, and so that alone is really good. And in a worst case scenario, it'll just mill some stuff. So I'm sure that a deck like Tearlaments would probably love a card like this. On the other hand though, we kind of get back to that whole, it's not that useful in the first turn, it's a trap card so it's kind of slow. I don't know, like, I'm not doubting that it would be run. I'm just wondering if the impact would be high. Like, yeah, I, would probably just toss in a Sixth Sense into my Tearlaments deck. And like, if it shows up, good. If it doesn't, whatever. Like, so in that way, it's kind of like a nice little win more card. I'll say that of the cards on this list, it's a trickier one for sure. So this is much more in my like maybe category, like, you know, try it and see. Maybe this is a complete nightmare. I know that there are technically decks now that can more reliably search it. Like Triple Tactics Thrust could get this. Like I could see maybe Labyrinth having a bit of fun with a card like this. But I'm still just like, bring it back. Let's see if that happens. If it's bad, ban it again. Okay, next trap card on this list is Red Reboot. Now I know this is a contentious one for many reasons. People find this card to be just obnoxious, and I get it. It negates a trap card, flips it back face down, and then you can't use traps for the rest of the turn. Red Reboot lets you activate it from hand. So it already kind of speeds past that whole problem that a lot of other slower trap cards have. You can just pay half your life points and it's like a solemn judgment from hand for traps, and that can oftentimes be the bane of a deck like a Labyrinth deck, an Eldritch deck, and just, you know, anything that's sort of trap based. In that way, yeah, I get it. Probably could just stay banned and no one would really miss this card. It's like a huge buff to combo decks. The thing is though, this card's actually like at 1 in the OCG and like at 2 in Master Duel or something like that. Like it shows up, to be clear. Like it's very good, but I mean, it's there, it exists. Like, I don't know. When I see people complaining about cards they want banned on Master Duel, for instance, this just isn't really a card that comes up in those conversations. I guess it's one of those things where you could say, well, that's not a good excuse to bring it back. Like just because it's not the #1 most hated card doesn't mean, you know, I know people are gonna probably say that. So fair, I hear ya. I just don't find the card to be particularly, I just don't think it's the worst thing in the world. Yeah, so that's my rationale. Maybe not the best, but it's something. Okay, the next card is Knightmare Goblin. So this card came back actually in Master Duel pretty recently, and I have a hunch that it'll be coming back to the TCG pretty soon. Knightmare Goblin, I'll keep it straight with people. I think that Knightmare Goblin in kind of the era that it came out, like 2018, you know, Goki decks and stuff, early links, really good, strong card. However, I think that today's combo decks have become so much more streamlined that if you're having to use a card like Knightmare Goblin, your deck probably is just like a weird like pile or something that's just sort of scraping by. Like I feel like most decks nowadays have something that's just much more efficient and like in archetype that sort of does the same thing, gives them that extra summon and stuff like that. Because like a Knightmare Goblin takes 2 monsters, which not the hardest thing to do. There's plenty of warm bodies in the game nowadays, but like you can get a lot more value off of 2 monsters when you look at maybe just something like, you know, making Goddess of the Closed Moon or whatever, and just like turning that into a Fiendsmith combo, or, you know, Nightmare Mermaid, a card that is currently banned, but like it's also something that could just be coming back soon because there's like Orcus support coming, and they might just do that. And I feel like that maybe would be a card that would be, like, in my opinion, a lot stronger than Nightmare Goblin, or even just like your Heavy Metal Foes Electromite, which is a spoiler, that's a card that I think, like, I don't know, I think there are like better Link 2s that just do more than this card does. And again, it came back in Master Duel and like no one plays this card. Like I see this not any whatsoever at all. So I think it can come back. And then the final card on the list is gonna be one that this has like a huge asterisk by it, because not that I think that it would be broken or anything, but just a logistics thing. That final card is Fiber Jar. So it's, you know, kind of the last and probably most, just arguably most iconic or infamous jar card. Flip and you just shuffle like all cards into the player's hands and like graveyards and fields and stuff back into the deck, and you draw 5 cards. So it's kind of like a huge reset on the duel. I don't think this card would ever be run. I don't think that it would even resolve very much. I mean, Imperm, Valor, people, you know, there's a lot of negates. The only reason that this is probably an issue is just because, like, it's kind of a troll thing. Someone's gonna be at table 500 playing some weird flippy empty jar mess, and like a judge is gonna get called, and it's gonna be a little bit of a nightmare. You will not see this at the top tables of a YCS, but I can see why it maybe should just stay banned, because similar to like self-destruct button or something, you know, there could be just a stall strategy in FTK. I don't, you know, whatever, I don't know. But it could come back. Like, it wouldn't make any impact meaningfully, but it just, yeah, you get what I'm saying. Okay, so those are the 10 Yu-Gi-Oh cards that I think can come off this list. I'm sure at least one of these cards pissed you off. Now, also, I did mention at the beginning of the video that there are a bunch of archetypal cards that I 100% think could just come off the list, like, you know, entirely. Heavy Metal Foes Electromite, this has been around in Master Duel, makes no difference. Masterpiece, same thing. Spiral, Master Plan, same thing. Zodiac Trident, Prank Kids, Meow Meow Mew. Just all this stuff. I don't know, like some of these cards are still on the ban list. I think they could all just kind of go. But yeah, so that's the video. It was a bit of a longer one, but I just wanted to kind of explain where my head was at with some of these cards and get people's opinions on them. Keep an open mind, like seriously ask yourself, would these cards be played? How much impact would they make? Try to look beyond just the idea that, well, it's a good card. Yeah, a lot of cards today are good. That said though, there were ones on this list that I wasn't entirely sure of and kind of was like, I'll just include it and people can talk about that. Anyways, I'm gonna make another video that's very similar to this. I'll probably upload it tomorrow where I'm talking about cards that are currently limited to 1 and I think could go to like 2 or 3. So it should be similarly spicy, so keep an eye out for that. Or it might already be up by the time you're watching this. All right, it's gonna be it. I will see you guys in the next one. Make sure you thumbs up if you enjoyed this sort of thing. Subscribe because we're almost at 100,000 subscribers here on APS Amplifier. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bastard.